Chapter 29. Julian. Julian was taking extra care dressing since it was a special day. He'd selected an outfit by his old friend Vivian Westwood. Perhaps he should look her up again. She probably thought he was dead. A fine kilt and jacket and contrasting tartans with asymmetric hems. If you couldn't wear Westwood on Christmas Day, then when could you? He had his radio tuned to a music station that was playing Fairy Tale of New York, and he was singing along about how he could have been someone. Julian had been someone, and then no one. Today, he felt like someone again. Someone with an invitation to Christmas lunch, at least. With friends. They were friends, weren't they? Proper ones? Monica hadn't just asked him out of pity or a sense of duty. He was sure she hadn't. He remembered the first Christmas after Mary, when he hadn't even realized the significance of the day until he'd turned the TV on in the mid-afternoon. All the festive televisual jollity had driven him back to bed with a cold tin of baked beans, a fork, and a bowl full of regrets. He tried out one of his Tai Chi moves in his full-length dressing room mirror. He realized he looked like a crazed Highlander. He walked into a sitting room where his presents for Monica, Riley, Benji, Baz, and Mrs. Wu were sitting on the coffee table waiting to be wrapped. It took him a little longer than he'd anticipated, as his clumsy fingers got in rather a mess with the sellotape. He tried to untangle them by grabbing the tape with his teeth and got his mouth stuck to his hands. As Julian walked out onto the Fulham Road, he spotted Riley walking toward him. He must have cut through the cemetery from Earl's Court. He hadn't stayed at Monica's then. How old-fashioned. Julian had never been that old-fashioned, even in the days when one was supposed to be. Riley looked a little stunned by his outfit. He was obviously impressed. Monica opened the door of the cafe looking adorable. She was wearing a red dress covered by a plain white chef's apron. She looked like she'd been working at a hot stove because her cheeks were flushed, and the tendrils of hair that had escaped from her customary ponytail were damp. She was also holding a wooden spoon, which she waved in a sweeping motion as she said, "Come in!" A table, big enough for 8, had been laid for 4 in the center of the cafe. It was covered in a white linen tablecloth scattered with rose petals that had been spray-painted gold. Each place setting was marked by a gold pine cone that held a small card with a name on it. There were red crackers, red and gold candles, and a centerpiece of holly and ivy. Even to Julian's critical eye, it looked stunning. "Have you been up all night, Monica?" he asked. "It looks gorgeous, as do you, and that's a professional opinion." Monica's cheeks reddened even more. "I did get up rather early. Go and join Benji in the library and put those presents under the tree." A bottle of champagne lounged in an ice bucket on one of the coffee tables, alongside a large platter of smoked salmon blennies. The air was filled with the smell of roasting turkey and the sound of the King's College Choir singing carols. It was one of those days when all plans came together. Monica came over, taking off her apron as she sat down. "Right. We've got an hour before I need to put the last vegetables on. Shall we open some presents? We could do some now and some after lunch." Julian, who, unlike Monica, was not a fan of delayed gratification, said, "Please, can we do mine first?" Not giving them any time to object, he pulled his pile of presents, wrapped in matching paper, from under the tree and handed them round. "I'm afraid I didn't actually buy anything," he explained. "I just had a rummage around my cottage." Benji, who had been first to rip the paper off his parcel, was looking at the present on his lap open-mouthed. "A Sgt. Pepper album! In vinyl! You can't give this away, Julian. It'll be worth a fortune," protested Benji, although he was clinging on to the record as if he couldn't bear to be parted from it. "I'd rather give it to someone who'll appreciate it properly, dear boy. And I know how much you love the Beatles. They were never really my thing. Too goody-goody. The Sex Pistols? They were right up my alley." He turned to Riley, who was holding up an original Rolling Stones t-shirt in awe. "Well, you've been wanting to get your hands on my clothes for ages, young Riley. You can sell it if you like, but I think it'd look rather good on you." The present Julian really wanted to see opened was Monica's. He watched her carefully peel off the sellotape, taking an age. "Just rip it, dear child," he told her. She looked slightly shocked. "You can't reuse it if it's ripped," she said, as if admonishing an overexcited toddler. Finally, she peeled back the paper and gasped. That was the reaction he'd been waiting for. The others gathered around to peer at the present lying in her lap. "Julian, it's beautiful. Far more beautiful than I am," she said. He'd painted her in oils, partly from memory and partly from the sketches he'd managed to do surreptitiously during their art classes. It was only a small canvas showing Monica, chin resting on her hand, with a strand of her hair entwined around her index finger. Like all Julian's portraits, the brushstrokes were bold and sweeping, almost abstract, and the painting conveyed as much in the details left out as in the ones he'd included. He looked at the real Monica. She seemed as if she were about to cry. In a good way, he assumed. "It's the first thing apart from our recent Pollock collaboration I've painted for 15 years, he said. "So I'm afraid I'm a bit rusty." They were interrupted by a banging on the door. Benji, realizing that it must be Baz and his granny, went to unlock it. Julian put Baz and Mrs. Wu's gifts on the table next to him in preparation. He had his back to the door, so he didn't see Baz's face until he joined them. The others had gone quiet. "Is something the matter, Baz?" asked Monica. "Where's Betty?" Julian had a terrible feeling that he knew what was coming next. He could feel Baz's eyes boring into him as he spoke, but he dared not look at him. Instead, he focused on his shoes, classic black brogues, beautifully polished. So few people polished their shoes properly these days. "Granny hasn't come out of her room since last night," he said in a voice tight with controlled rage. "Why not?" asked Benji. "Is she ill?" "Maybe you should ask Julian," Baz replied. Julian had a mouthful of blenny, but he couldn't swallow it as his throat seemed to have dried up. He picked up his glass of champagne and took a big gulp. "I'm really sorry, Baz. I thought she knew. Surely it's no big deal these days who you fall in love with. It's not like the 60s, when my friend Andy Warhol was the only openly homosexual man I knew. The closet, meanwhile, was bursting with them." Everyone had gone silent, having put 2 and 2 together and made 4. "Granny hasn't quite caught up with the modern trend. She's not exactly woke. She's been wailing for hours about how her life will have been in vain. What's the point in having worked her fingers to the bone, setting up a business for her descendants to inherit it if she wasn't going to have any? She's beside herself." Baz sat down and put his head in his hands. Julian thought he preferred him angry to desolate. "What about your parents, Baz? Are they okay?" asked Benji, reaching for his hand. Baz snatched it away, as if his grandmother might be watching. "They're surprisingly sanguine about it. I think they've known all along." "I'm not trying to excuse my letting the proverbial cat out of the bag, dear boy. But isn't it better to have these things out in the open? Isn't it a relief? Secrets can make you sick. I should know," said Julian. "It was not your secret to tell, Julian. I would have told her in my own way, in my own time, or not at all. Honesty is not always the best policy. Sometimes we have secrets for a reason, to protect the people we love. Would it have been so very terrible if Granny had gone to her grave believing that my Chinese wife and I would take over the restaurant and fill it with little baby Wus?" "But said Julian, before Baz interrupted. "I don't want to hear it, Julian. And by the way, I don't believe for 1 minute that you were a friend of Andy Warhol, or Marianne Faithfull, or Princess Bloody Margaret. You're one big fake sitting there in your ridiculous checked skirt. Why don't you go back to your rubbish dump and stay out of my business? And with that, he stood up and walked out. In the stunned silence he left behind him, you could have heard a pine needle drop onto the polished oak floor.